Hello students, I'm Dr. Himanshu Kandpal, Assistant Professor English, Government MS College for Women, Bikaner. Today we are going to study life and works of Toru Dutt. Toru Dutt holds a prominent place in the early phase of the history of Indian poetry in English. Though she lived for a very short span, yet the quality of her creative endeavor is unmatchable. Toru Dutt was born on March 4, 1856 in a respectable Hindu family of Calcutta as the third daughter of Govind Chandra Dutt. The Dutt family was a family of distinguished intellectuals and poets, and Toru had the double advantage of a wealthy parentage and an intellectual and cultural inheritance of a high order. Her father was a prominent linguist and also a cultured man with literary interest. Her mother had strong faith in Hindu religion and was well versed with Hindu myths. When Torudat was 6 years old, her family got converted to Christianity, and later then they went to France and then to Cambridge, England, where she and her elder sister Aro attended the higher lectures for women and also made friends with Mary Martin, who became Toru's lifelong friend, with whom Toru remained in contact through her letters, which are of great literary value. She had also had the advantages of being taught by excellent English tutors at home, later on of long stay in Europe and England, where she was fully exposed to the languages and cultures of both the countries. The Dutts and their children, Abju, Aru, and Toru, were baptized in the Christ Church, Cornwallis Square, Calcutta, but Toru's mother continued to be a pious Hindu under whose influence Toru acquired all her knowledge of Indian legends and Puranas and also learned to respect all that was good and great in the Hindu religion and culture. In fact, Toru, with all her exposure and involvement in Western life and culture, loved the land of her birth and remained thoroughly Indian in her consciousness and sensibility, which we can very well see in her works. Toru, like her brother and sister, was destined to die young, for she died in 1876 when she was 21. Like Keats, she was a poet of unfulfilled renown, and while one keeps wondering what her achievement would have been had she lived longer, one cannot but be struck by the quality of the works she had left behind, both in verse and prose. Besides her well known collection of poems with the title Ancient Ballads and Legends of Hindustan, published in 1882, she has to her credit a volume of poems in French entitled Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, published in 1875, a novel in French Le Journal de Mademoiselle d'Avers, and an unfinished novel in English, Bianca or the Spanish Maiden, which appeared as a serial in the Bengali magazine between January 1878 and April 1878. In many ways, Torudat's poetry sheds light on her status as a transitional or hybrid figure, situated not just at the crossroads of different cultures and traditions, but also at a turning point in literary history. In what are perhaps her most famous poems, those which, like Sita, Battu, and Lakshman, retell traditional legends or stories from her native India, this tendency is put on full display. Not only does Dutt, as is suggested by the title of the collection in which these works appear, Ancient Ballads and Legends of Hindustan, rework these Indian stories to mostly fit within the constraint of an English verse form, is that the ballad, but she also is able to take these canonical stories and inject them with new personal flourishes. Battu, for example, is not just a poem which retells the Eklavya story from the Sanskrit epic Mahabharata, but it complicates the Eklavya story by adding in an element of class tension, the theme of rejection, an element theme of class tension, the theme of rejection, and an explicit moral at the tale's close. Still, Dutt is not content to simply make her own Eastern cultural heritage intelligible to a Western audience. Also present in ancient ballads are poems like Our Casuarina Tree, The Tree of Life, and Bagmare, which seeks to wrestle with Dutt's life experiences as contextualized by her encounters with different cultures and religions in colonial India, is that Indian and European, Christian and Hindu, etc., exploring the porous and interpenetrating experiences she has of these different influences. We can say her maturity of thought and expression and blending of Western influences and Indian sensibility at a time when most of the Indian poets writing in English were imitating the Western content and poetic idiom lent her a unique place in setting new trends in writing poetry in English. In Our Casuarina Tree, for example, that seeks to find her own place as a poet in the shadow of Wordsworth, but simultaneously looks down on English landscape as unable to match the lasting influence of one of her favorite childhood trees. We can say her poetic sensibility was nourished by her French education, lectures she had attended at Cambridge, and her study of Sanskrit literature. She has assimilated all these in her ballads. In fact, she is the first Indian poet who wrote about Indian myths and legends. And with that, she has also written many nature poems which show her affinities mainly with two romantic poets, we can say, John Keats and William Wordsworth. In The Tree of Life, that takes us from an interior Indian scene with a father deep into the space of Christian imagery, where she finds an angel and the tree of life. Similar work is done in Bagmari, where Dutt links the garden home of her youth to the biblical space of Eden. Even though Dutt's Christian training and her girlhood spent partly in France and partly in England are influential in what English historian Fisher calls Dutt's unique appreciation of Western literature and hold upon the essential soul of the two languages in which she wrote. It is not just this linking of East and West that is impressive and significant in Dutt's larger body of work. Indeed, even in the translations that Dutt undertook in her first collection, A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, with what stands out is not just Dutt's multilingual and multicultural comprehension, but also her preoccupation and foregrounding of the themes of loss, youth, and the nature. Uh, Toru engaged. It was the time when the family was back home in India in November 1873, and here Toru engaged herself in translating the French lyrics by 70 different poets into English, which were published in 1876 with the title A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields. Even the translations that undertakes in her first collection, A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, she talks about the themes of loss, youth, and nature. Like many other authors whose work is translated in a sheaf, Dutt has a deep romantic interest in the relationship or rift, depending on the context, between mankind and the natural world. Unlike some of these authors, however, Dutt's exploration of nature is not based in a singular understanding of nature as sublime and pure, nor an understanding of the natural world as deterministic. Rather, that allows nature to take on the variety of dynamic roles in her work that intermingle personal experiences of loss and growth, self discovery, and deep reflection. Though much scholarship and attention is devoted to her positioning as a poet of the East and West, Toru that must also be understood as an important woman writer. Among the many projects that juggled before her death, one was a translation of French author Clarice Bedet's work on women in India. Moravian poems like Sita that explore the shared experiences of women throughout time in linking herself to both her mother and Sita, who are also set up as parallels. This understanding of Dutt, not only a key figure of Indian and global romanticism, but also an important women writer of colonial India, positions herself uniquely in both literary and conventional history and had contributed greatly to her posthumous popularity among both Indian and global readers. Here we can uh, quote James Dempster, a prominent French critic who commented on her literary genius. This daughter of Bengal, so admirably and so strangely gifted, Hindu by race and tradition, an English woman by education, French woman at heart, poet in English, prose writer in French, who at the age of 18 made India acquainted with the poets of French in the rhyme of England, who blended in herself three souls and three traditions and died at the age of 21 in the full bloom of her talent and on the eve of the awakening of her genius, presents in the history of literature a phenomenon without parallel. This is so, this is all about the author, one of the renowned poetess and writer, Toru Dutt.